Thanks very much, Jeffrey. And thanks for coming back. It would have been very tempted to stay out there. And this is the first. In the past, I've had the after lunch session and I've had the before the afternoon coffee session, but I've never had both together. And I think we're both together on this. So hopefully you'll find this of interest. We've had Slido this morning for some questions, and I'd encourage you to put your hand up if you have any questions at any time. Stop me if there's anything that's not clear. But Slido can also be used for polling. I don't know whether we can get we probably can't now, get that Slido QR code up. But if you can get on your Slido app, I've got mine here. So on the Slido, you got it? Oh, good. Okay. So if you get on here, there is also a poll, and you'll see at the top on the right-hand side, you'll see poll. If you click on poll, there is a question. Have you all got that? Okay, very simple question. So you take a 9 kg cylinder full of LPG and you throw it in Lake Taupo. What's it going to do? Is it going to float or is it going to sink? So you've got two answers. Just click on one of those. You can't click on both. At least I don't think you can. So click on what you think is the right answer. So this is so we're talking about 18 kilograms of metal and gas. Throw it into the lake. What's it going to do? Is it going to float or is it going to sink? Full up. Yeah. Well, I live in Australia, and I think who's from the domestic market from Australia? I think it's all propane in Australia for the domestic sector. So, Jeffrey, how many votes? Do you want to stop there? Last chance. You won't get embarrassed because it's all anonymous. Okay, should we call it quits now? And the answer is, well, tell me how the votes come.
79% say it would float, 21% say it would sink.
Okay. Well, yeah, you're right. It would float. The density of LPG is about half of water, and it compensates for the metal in the container, and it would indeed float. So what's important about that is that if you are in a flood-prone area, you better make sure that your LPG cylinders, your tanks, your trucks are all secured. You'll hear tomorrow, I think Albert de Geest is going to talk about LPG in humanitarian settings, and he's going to be talking a little bit about the Kobe incident in Japan, which our friends in the front will well remember if you're old enough. And of course, we had another incident in Japan in 2011, I think it was. And you've had your own problems here as well. But with tsunamis, you can get very, very quick penetration of the area by water. And if you haven't got that equipment tied down properly, secured properly, it will float. And there's some dramatic pictures in that Kobe incident. And also in Houston a few years ago, of LPG tankers. These are 20-ton tankers floating down the Gulf of America. So a little safety message there. And we talk about safety. I was really pleased this morning to see a safety moment. We at the association, we always start our meetings with a safety moment, and I'm going to start off with one here. But the rest of the stuff I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to talk too much about renewables. I'll talk about the structure that we have in place within the association for tackling the challenges of moving towards what I call the new game. I get told off for this sometimes, but I'm in a room of friends here, so I can talk about the old game and the new game. The old game I talk about is the traditional fossil-based LPG stuff. The new game is where we have to play. We have to play the new game in the future, and that's what we've been talking about this morning, the renewables, the not just renewable LPG, but dimethyl ether as well as an alternative to fossil LPG. We have to play that game, because if we don't play that game, then government policymakers in Europe and North America particularly, and also here, won't let you in the door. If you're walking in there with a fossil-based product and no future other than fossil, you won't get a look in. So we have to play that new game. But I'm old school, and although I recognize we have to play that new game, I also spend a lot of time playing the old game. And playing the old game, I'll talk to you about that in a minute, what we do to play the old game, particularly in developing countries where there's over 2 billion people still burning wood and charcoal for their primary cooking fuel. You know, this lady in the corner here, 2 billion people, and you can see that photo at the bottom of the GasNZ banner. There's 2 billion people aspire to be her, aspire to use LPG, and they're very happy to use fossil-based LPG, that population. They're not looking at renewables. But we have to look at renewables for all the other reasons I've just talked about. Hot off the press, I can tell you the latest supply-demand pictures for the global LPG industry. We got those last week. I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities for LPG elsewhere other than cooking, and also the role of LPG in a net zero world. How does that fossil LPG and the renewable LPG fit in a net zero world? So I'm going to dance around a little bit, and if there's anything I haven't covered you want me to talk about, if I've got any answers, I'll tell you. So the safety moment. Every month, the second Tuesday in the month, the World Liquid Gas Association holds a safety group meeting. It actually has two in the same day. I was talking to Nick about the challenges of working across a 24-hour time zone where we've got members all around the world. So we have two meetings. We have one early morning in Europe. And that's principally for this part of the world, for the Asia Pacific, New Zealand, Australia audience. And then we'll have another one later on in the day for the center. That's the African region, the European, Middle East, and Americas. And we talk anything to do with safety. We have a discussion about anything that's been going on in the last 4 weeks on safety, any incidents that have occurred. We'll interrogate those incidents with the knowledge that we have and come up with some mitigating suggestions as to how that can be prevented from happening again. So it's like, we said there's no secrets in safety, so we have a really open, transparent discussion. And we typically have about 20 or 30 people on the call on each one of those East Zone and West Zone meetings. That's the link at the bottom to that website page on the top right. And one of the incidents that we looked at last year was in India, when it wasn't a 9 kg cylinder, it's a little bit bigger than that, but it was being handled off a filling plant. It was full. It had been taken off because of the condition of the cylinder. It somehow sort of got through all the checks and balances, and before it went out into the market, somebody on the filling plant picked it up. I wouldn't say dropped it, but they didn't place it. And the bottom of the cylinder was so badly corroded, it basically opened up like a tin can. You can see that. The operator was killed. There was a complete evacuation of that cylinder, and it shot up. He was killed, and 2 other people were injured. It was operated by Indian Oil. Indian Oil had a big investigation, and basically what they found was that they weren't looking at the bottom of cylinders enough. Okay, so the message here is make sure, if you're running a business, and many of you are here, just make sure that you're inspecting as best you can the underside of that cylinder. In India, the ground conditions are not always ideal for putting cylinders on. They're often uneven, sharp, wet. Corrosion builds up, and it's often not seen. So the Indians then had an investigation, and they discovered that not enough was being done to inspect the underside of cylinders. So they employed an Indian startup to have a look at how they could improve that whole process. And with the use of AI and the 3D cameras, they could, in the space of 2.5 seconds, because that's how long it was taking these cylinders to go through, they could do a quick examination of the base of the cylinder to determine whether there was any corrosion, and if it was, what sort of level. It was all done on digital imaging, but it was a really big breakthrough, and that's now been installed in the IOC engine oil filling plants. The little piece of paper on the right-hand side is a one-page safety alert that was issued. It's on our website, just reminding people that if you're running an LPG business where you're filling cylinders, to check the condition of the underside. I won't say much about the association if you're not familiar with it. The only big news, I think, over the last 12 months is we've changed our name. We've dropped the P. I think there was a bit of concern about having petroleum in the name, so we dealt with that. We just simply removed it. So we're now called World Liquid Gas Association, and that will include renewable LPG and DME as well. And you can see as a result of that, the website name has changed, email addresses have changed. I think they still sort of flick on if you get their old one, but so that's the big news in the last few months. Just very quickly, we have a vision statement which gets revisited every year. So at the end of next year, we'll have a look at this, make sure it's still up to date. And then we have these 4 mission goals. And what I'm talking about today comes under what we call safety and business improvement. We have an advocacy goal where we go out and talk to externally and internally. We have communication lines. We have a sustainable growth and innovation, which talks about new applications for LPG. And then finally, we have a communications goal. So these are the 4 goals. That's all I'm going to say about the World LPG or World Liquid Gas Association. So this is what came out just the other day. This is a document that gets published around this time of the year, and it reflects the 2023 data on supply demand of about 125 different countries. New Zealand is in there, of course. So we communicate with associations like your association here to make sure we got the right numbers for New Zealand. We look at the production figures if you're producing LPG. That's why I was looking very carefully yesterday when I went to the Todd facility to hear about what they're doing in terms of producing LPG for the New Zealand. So all that data is in this document. We also have some narrative on renewables, the state of play on renewables. And most important of all, we have the big numbers. So in a nutshell, what's happened in the last 12 months in 2023, the global supply of LPG has increased by about 3-4%. And along with it has the demand for LPG globally gone up 3-4%. So I was hearing this morning about the supply challenge in the future. New Zealand need not worry. There is plenty of LPG around. If we look at where it's going, about 40-odd% of it goes into the domestic sector. So LPG is a fantastic cooking fuel. It has a very, very hot flame, something like 2,000 degrees. It's perfect for cooking, for stir frying. I'll talk in a minute about comparing cooking with an LPG flame to a charcoal flame or a wood flame that these 2 billion ladies and men have to tolerate at the moment. It is a step change in their cooking ability, amongst other things. One thing of interest here is that the blue pie slice on the left-hand side, that's the one nearest me pointing over here, is what is going into the chemical industry as a feedstock. So in the chemical industry, they often swap between naphtha, which is a derivative of the crude oil refining process, and LPG, interchangeable. And this is why, if you look over the years, this is why the international price of LPG is broadly related to the international crude price, because naphtha comes off the crude oil barrel and an LPG is following that. And what's interesting is that the 28% of global demand going into the chemical sector, if it didn't go there, then I suspect a lot of the product would be flared. It's like we have this use it or lose it phrase. So if we don't put this LPG supply to good use, then what are we going to do with it? We simply, there's a limit as to how much we can store globally in our storage facilities. So it's a very important pie segment, but it's a great shame that we have to do that, because that would be much better placed in some of those more value-added sections where we're looking at refinery use, domestic, agriculture, industry, and transport being auto gas. So we'd very much like to see that blue segment shrink, and some of that chemical feedstock product going into the more value-added sections, particularly, as I said, when there's 2 billion people who are crying out for it. The other interesting thing to see here is that if you look 10 years ago, the amount of LPG being used within the refinery has more or less doubled in percentage terms. So 10 years ago, about 7% of total demand was going into the refinery. Now, that would include the blending component that LPG is, when it's put into gasoline as a blending component, the octane number of LPG is extremely high. So if you're a refinery manager and you're producing a gasoline stream, then putting LPG into it is actually going to enhance the properties and characteristics of that gasoline. So some of that is going into the gasoline pool as a blending component. And more recently, some of it is being burnt within the refinery to get their emissions down for their whole refinery process. So where they might have been burning fuel oil in the past, they're now using LPG because it is a much lower carbon footprint. So this is the other trend that we've been watching. Then when we look at where the product's being used, I'm now standing here in what I call the Asia-Pacific Oceania region, where about half of our members are. We have about 300 members, and about half of them are in this region. You can see that the demand for LPG in that top bar is Asia-Pacific. It's the fastest growing region as well for LPG use. It grew about 6%, you can see, in 2023. This includes the petrochemical demand as well, and there was a big jump in petrochemical demand in China in 2023. And you can also see, unfortunately, the African demand, which I'm looking over here, I can see it. The African demand is that sort of red-orangey bit. And over the last 6 years or so, it's been pretty flat. There hasn't been a great deal of improvement in that. And if you look at the continent of Africa, the top end, sort of Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, these are big consumers of LPG. But if you go below sub-Saharan Africa, it's hardly used at all. South Africa, beginning to pick up, but there are so many African countries where predominantly wood and charcoal is used for cooking, and that's one of the biggest challenges we have. I'm currently working with the World Bank on a project in Malawi. Malawi has a population similar to Australia, and I think the total demand for LPG in Malawi at the moment is about 2,000 tons. 2,000, that's it. So a massive opportunity for getting LPG into Malawi. The problem is that the people don't earn very much, and it's landlocked. So to get it into the country, you have to truck it from the east coast of Tanzania, and Mozambique. So big challenge for Africa. We're trying to improve that slice. Although there was a bit of an improvement last year, nearly 5%, it's off a very, very low base. So this is, in a nutshell, this is a snapshot of the surplus or deficit of LPG in those parts of the world. So anything above the line is potentially exported, and anything below the line is imported. And you can see Asia is a big importer of LPG, that bottom right-hand corner. Russia has the potential of exporting 4 or 5 million tons, and the issues in Russia and Ukraine over the last couple of years have had a bit of a issue with that product coming out of Russia. That's going to worsen at the end of the year. The EU sanctions on Russian imports of LPG will take effect at the end of this year. It was announced at the beginning of this year. There's a year moratorium, and by the end of this year, there will be no LPG exports into Europe. A lot of it is at the moment going through Poland, but that will stop. And most likely that Russian product will find its way into China, Turkey, and Afghanistan, places like that. The other thing to mention here is Iran. At the moment, Iran is, as of 2023, the third largest exporter of LPG out of the Middle East. So it's taken the place of Saudi. Saudi was number 3. The UAE and Qatar were 1 and 2. So Iran is now number 3 exporter in the Middle East. So where's that going, you might ask, with sanctions on Iran? Well, it's going to places like China, mostly, because they're not impacted by sanctions. And it really is an interesting one because we're watching, Iran was mentioned this morning in one of the presentations. We're watching events in the Middle East really closely because, we all know the possibility of some sort of retaliatory action from Israel over the last few weeks' events. And one possible target might be the LPG export facilities, because that would really hurt. But the implications of that on pricing around the world would be quite significant. So all I'll say about Iran is watch that space very, very carefully over the next few weeks. I think the other point to mention here is that you'll see an arrow from the North America on the left-hand side. You'll see an arrow going west, and that would typically be through the Panama Canal, because the export center in America is Houston. So the ships would come out of Houston having loaded at Enterprise or Phillips or Targa with a VLGC carrying 40-odd thousand tons of LPG, turning right to go through the Panama Canal. And that's been interrupted recently because of similar issues to you with water. The Panama Canal has not been able to operate efficiently because they were short of water. So some of that trade has gone east through the Suez Canal or around the bottom of South Africa into Asia. And that adds time onto the journey. Freight costs go up. VLGC rates have gone up. So all of these dynamics have happened simply because the Panama Canal is running out of water. So lots of things interact this business, and it's completely dynamic. So if we were to look at the world in the context of where the LPG is being used, you'd end up with a map like this. And this is what we called the heat map. This is the heat map for LPG use around the world. So this is the per capita consumption of LPG per person per year. Red is in the order of 40, 50 kilograms per person per year. Parts of Africa you can see are white, where there's pretty well zero demand. And then in between you've got shades of pink and yellow. So this is the map we like to say we're going to try and paint the world red, because these are the opportunities for LPG use, particularly in parts of Asia and and of course Africa. The focus on Africa really came to a head in I think it was in May this year, when there was a meeting in Paris with some heads of government, really trying to understand why Africa was so much lagging behind in terms of clean cooking when you look at what they're doing at the moment to what they could be doing. Now, we all know there's lots of challenges with that, with affordability, accessibility. So this big meeting took place in Paris over a couple of days. Some powerful people were there, presidents of countries were there, trying to sort this out. And as a result of that, there is now starting to see some movement as to how we can address that. And I mentioned the World Bank project with one country, and that solutions that we might find in Malawi, we could possibly look at for other countries in the world. And it's probably here I'll mention something, and it made me shudder a few years ago. When I was here, I was in Christchurch, and the New Zealand Prime Minister was just about to jump on a plane. We've heard the story again this morning about her announcement about banning of offshore exploration. And I thought then it was quite a selfish act, because what was happening was a country was basically denying the opportunity for developing countries to use LPG. It was a denial of that. You know, we're okay here. We're not going to do any more exploration. And it wasn't just New Zealand. There are other countries as well. So when I go back to Australia and I talk with companies like Inpex, who are exporting, 2 or 3 million tons of LPG every year to Japan and also other Asian countries, I think it's worthwhile mentioning to them that part of what is happening with that whole process is that you're improving the standard of living for many, many people. And you're giving them the opportunity to achieve what this lady is doing. And to deny them that is a bit of a shame. So when I talk to the exporters, they're not fully familiar with the repercussions of those exports. They understand it's a big line on the annual report, but that's as far as it goes. We don't interrogate what actually happens to that product. And I think it's a strong message to make when we talk to our politicians and our policymakers, that even though we're not maybe using LPG here and we're exporting it somewhere else, then this is what the repercussions of that are. And then I think the last slide I've got on my supply-demand summary is the fact that if we go out to 2030, and this is a forecast by Argus Media, and if you go and talk to other companies like Opis or S&P Global, they'll have a similar sort of outlook. What this is showing basically is the dark blue line is the production or the supply availability, and the light blue is their forecast of demand. And there is a difference, and the difference is a surplus. So the message here is that certainly for the next 10 years, there's going to be no change in that. There's going to be no cliff effect. You're not going to run out of LPG. So back to my message earlier on this morning, that you have no fear that if you suddenly wanted to use LPG more in New Zealand and didn't have the capability of using it, using your indigenous supplies, there's plenty of it around, maybe from Australia. And the other message to make, of course, is that this is the old game. We are now starting to play the new game, and the amount of new product going into the supply forecast is going to get bigger and bigger as we move forward. So a word or two on the renewables, certainly from the association's perspective. And I'm not the expert on renewables in our team. And indeed, what I've done, I've borrowed a couple of slides from somebody who does know quite a bit about it, and that's a guy called Eric Johnson from Atlantic Consulting, who works with our association. So Eric loaned me a couple of slides, and I said I'd give him a plug. He works out of Switzerland. But the structure within our association, we only have, 9, 10 people in our association. Most of them are in Paris. I'm located in Perth on the west coast of Australia. We also have somebody living in Colorado in the US. So this effort is being led by a very, very small team, and we need to co-opt people in from the industry. So you'll see some big players down the bottom of this chart. So what I really want to tell you here is that we've got a renewable steering committee having a look at what's going on. I think last night we heard a little bit about why Albert de Geest recommended the New Zealand Association become closer to us, because we have this body of expertise. And you look at the names of the companies down the bottom there, and GasNZ is mentioned, representing this part of the world. But you can also see Brazilian companies, American companies, European companies. So there's a lot of powerful people, powerful organizations behind this effort. And there are two working groups, one looking at renewable LPG, one looking at renewable DME. And the program, if we go back to that pie chart I showed you earlier, and that's why I was particularly focusing on that blue pie slice, the rest of that pie is about 3/4 of the demand. The target is to replace 50% of that 3/4, so that's 36%, with renewable LPG by 2050. So that's the overall target. That's what we're looking at. So if I showed you this graph or this pie chart in 2050, well, I won't be around to do that, but if I was, then I'd be saying to you that if we'd achieve that, then the accumulated volumes in those other four slices, not the one on the left, that's chemicals, that's excluded, but the accumulated volume in those other four pie slices, half of that would be met by renewable. So that's the overall target the association and the industry has. I think a word about renewable DME. When people talk to me about DME, it's been around for a long, long time. And I keep reminding folks that DME is a fantastic replacement for diesel. It has a very, very high cetane number. You can put DME into a diesel engine and it will perform and produce lower emissions than diesel. I was looking, and I don't know whether it's just New Plymouth, but I was looking at the cost of gasoline and diesel outside on the high street there. And diesel was being sold at about, I think, $1.80, $1.90. And gasoline was about $2.30, $2.40. Now, I know diesel is very, very important to an economy like New Zealand, but back in 2012, the World Health Organization announced that diesel emissions were a type 1 carcinogen for humans. Okay, so diesel emissions cause cancer to everybody in this room if you breathe diesel emissions in. And at the time, there was a shudder that went through the middle distillate industry because they said, well, hold on a minute. You know, this is something that we better keep under wraps. And indeed, for 24 hours, it went viral, and then it suddenly slowed down. And there hasn't been much said about diesel emissions since then. And I think because the middle distillate trade is so important for the refining business. But it's a fact. So to displace diesel with anything is a step in the right direction. And pricing it 50% lower than, or 30% lower than gasoline, certainly contrary to some of the other countries I go to, and I look at the price of diesel. Diesel is being priced very high, almost to discourage consumption. But of course, you need an alternative, and DME is a very, very good alternative. Work has been done with putting DME into LPG, very compatible. They're bed partners. You can do it without any fear now, because a lot of work's been done on testing of DME in a solution of LPG on things like seals and compatibility of equipment. And the UN have now just released this note that a 12% blend of DME into LPG has actually now got its own number. So there's a big step forward. So good progress being made with our DME. More to do. Now, this is where I'm going to lean on one of Eric's slides. And don't quiz me on some of this, but this gives you an indication of some of the pathways that are going on around the world in moving towards our LPG. And you can see that there's various processes there, and byproduct is an interesting one, because LPG is a byproduct. It's a byproduct of natural gas production and crude oil refining. And if we're looking at renewable gases in the future, they'll come from two paths. They'll come from what we call a traditional byproduct route, but also it will be deliberately making it as a sustainable fuel. So it's not a byproduct of anything. It's just that's what we're going to produce. So this is different to what the LPG path is at the moment. And if we look at the economics of renewables at the moment, there's a lot of expense. When we talk about the affordability of renewables and its role in the future, economics are going to come into play here, just as they are at the moment when we look at putting LPG into Africa. People who are getting wood for nothing are really going to struggle to buy LPG, even if it's a very, very low price. So two types of product, if you like. One is the byproduct, and the other is making it on purpose. And here again, not for reading here or going through here, but it'll be in your pack of presentation material. So go away, this is a bit of homework. You can look at what's going on around the world. What I want to say here is that there's a lot going on around the world in various parts of the world, looking at solutions, looking at pathways, looking at processes for producing renewable liquid gas. And just last slide on renewables. This is out of that document I just showed you, the 2024 statistical review of global LPG. It shows you where the renewables source, supply by source, is coming from. And you can see there that vegetable oil and used cooking oil, that's used CO, used cooking oil, are the favoured routes at the moment for producing renewable LPG. And on the right-hand side, you can see Argos's forecast, and they're talking about exponential growth. They talk about a very, very exciting new game we're going to be playing in the future. One more thing that we're doing in order to try and find out if somebody's got a really clever bit of technology that we haven't heard about is we run this competition in our annual LPG Week event, and that's coming up in a month's time in Cape Town, and it's called the Global Science Conference. And we've reached out to a lot of the technology startups, educational establishments, scientists, academics, looking at ways in which we can produce renewable LPG. And out of the 15 submissions that were received for this competition, 11 have been accepted for a presentation. It's being chaired by Keith Simons, who works with Futuria Fuels, and they will be showcased on the Friday of the week of the 18th. So what's that? 18, 19, 20, 22nd. Friday the 22nd, all day, there will be a stream of presentations by the Global Science Conference, and there'll be some really interesting stuff there. So we're trying to cover all bases here. We're trying to look at some new stuff that may be just coming on that we haven't heard about. So in summary, a lot going on, and we've got our eye on the ball, but it's not personally something I keep a close watch on. This is what I tend to do more of. I'm working in countries where there are these people who don't have access to LPG easily. And this is a partnership that we have with the UNHCR, which is the refugee agency of the United Nations. And if you remember back in 2017, in Burma or Myanmar, there was a bit of an uprising. The Rohingya refugees were forced out into Thailand. They now live in the southern part of Thailand in a very, very large refugee camp. It's the largest refugee camp in the world. And when they first arrived, they all started burning wood for their cooking. And all the trees around the camp disappeared. And the Bangladesh government got really grumpy and said, this has got to stop. They put pressure on the UN. The UN said, okay, we need to change. we'll change to LPG, but we don't know anything about LPG. So they reached out to us and we formed a bit like an MOU. So we now support the UNHCR in that whole transition. And it has happened. It happened over 3 years. So now we have 1 million people in Bangladesh who are burning LPG that didn't use LPG before. They were burning wood back in Myanmar as well. So a very important program. It's something that we're trying to replicate elsewhere. There's something like 75 million refugees in the world. And we're working closely with the UNHCR to see whether we can do a Me Too with this. Oh, and incidentally, down the bottom there, I talk about decarbonisation. We've actually achieved a 400,000 tonne reduction in CO2 from that camp by switching from wood to LPG. That's not my number, that's the UN's number, that's their calculation. So even traditional LPG decarbonises. I say here it's not just for cooking. There are so many different applications for LPG, and we have all these, not all, but most of them captured on this website called LPG Apps. And when you get the presentation, click on that link, and that'll take you straight into a whole kaleidoscope of applications for LPG. The one I've highlighted here is power generation, but you have all sorts of different applications for LPG that you can, if you wanted to look at, for example, something that I know I've talked to Albert before about this, is synthetic natural gas, where you actually take LPG, dilute it with air, so it achieves the same Wobbe indexes of natural gas, and they're then interchangeable. So I'm saying, well, if you're short of natural gas in New Zealand, why don't you invest in these modular, standalone LPG air systems? And you can park it alongside the factory or industry or whatever it is. And when there's a spike in natural gas prices, you can switch over, at the flick of a switch, to LPG air mixtures. You could also put an LPG air system in a location where there is no grid access to natural gas. It's often surprised me why LPG air systems or synthetic natural gas systems are not more popular. But you can interrogate that website, put in synthetic natural gas, and you'll get all the information you need on that. So just summarising, hope I'm overrun. Safety. If you don't kick off your meetings, your discussions with a safety moment, please consider it. It's useful to remind everybody about it. As I said, there's plenty of stuff around. We're not going to run out of LPG anytime soon. And if you forecast that chart up to 2050, people were talking, I think earlier, about whether LPG is going to be around, whether traditional LPG is going to be around in 2050. All the forecasts are, it certainly is. Because don't forget that there's refineries in the world that are producing gasoline, Jet A1 for aviation fuel, and diesel and kerosene for heating. They are all what the refinery manager would be tasked as KPIs for him. I used to work in a refinery, and I know when you go there in the morning, you're measured on those products. You're not measured on LPG. Not at all. That's a byproduct. You're certainly not driving your refinery to produce LPG. But you are producing these other products, and all these other products, you think about, at any moment in time, 10,000 aeroplanes flying around, they're all burning Jet A1. Yes, sustainable aviation fuel is coming, but it'll be a while. So traditional LPG, fossil LPG will be there as well. The Sustainable Development Goals, I went through one of the workshops we ran with all 17 of these, and either directly or indirectly, you can say that LPG contributes towards that goal. And it's quite a nice hook to hang a discussion around LPG on, because everybody understands what these SDGs are. And you can, if you want any help on picking any one of those and linking it to LPG, just ask me, because we did the exercise. So renewables are coming. How quickly and how affordable they will be, who knows, but we're certainly playing the new game. And one thing I didn't mention too much in this presentation is the role of digitalization, the Internet of Things. I think we're going to see a bigger role in the future with the Internet and digital solutions in some of the challenges that we're going to be faced down the track. So one last message is, I've mentioned this event. It's on the 18th to the 22nd of November. There's still an opportunity. It's going to be in Cape Town this year. We always look 2 or 3 years ahead. And for the last 6 months, I've been in discussions with the Australian and the New Zealand Association about the possibility of having 2027 in this part of the world. To be fair, most likely Sydney, but we've had discussions about whether we could actually bundle it with New Zealand and the Pacific and have a regional event. So we're still waiting to see whether that might happen. It will depend on the support we get from the local industry. So if you think it's a good idea, then I need a bit of lobbying support for that. I'm all for it because I live down here, but it'd be really nice if we could have the world's LPG Week 2027 in this region. So Jeffrey, I think that's it. I don't know whether I've gone over or...
I'm just spot on, Dave. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. But don't go away because we have time for one question. Conveniently, I have one question here, so that's really good. And I'm going to ask this to you, and I might also we've got 3 people here from Astomos Energy, and one of you may want to respond as well. So the question is there potential for RDME or renewable liquid gas import to Australasia, recognising the cost issue, but interested in the supply-demand balance for renewable LG elsewhere? Do you think it's possible? And you guys might like to comment as well.
Well, let me, while I think about that, let me ask these guys, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I'm from Astomos. Thank you for the presentations. So the RDME is how can I say, is led by the Western company, the diameter of this route, but the SHB Energy is still trying to realize it, and also the urban fuels in the United States, and also the air gas also trying to do that in the Australia. So the challenge is so the RDME is blending to the propans at maximum 12%. So that's why the remaining 88% is still remains. So our company is now trying to realize e-propans extracted from the biogas through the syngas. So to be replaced, maximum is 100%. Yeah. So we are doing the demonstration plant in the Hokkaido in the Japan. So we'd like to introduce this process to the some other countries, including this area in the future. Yeah. So maybe there are some combinations between the RDME and the LPGs. Yeah.
And what kind of time frame is your company looking at for productions to the level of volume that might have some spare for New Zealand?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a very challenging. Yeah, still the pilot stage. So,
pilot stage.
Yeah, very small scales. Yeah, but hopefully, as we already introduced, we collaborated with SHB Energies, and we are going to introduce commercializations by 2030. Yes, first kind of plant somewhere in the world. Yeah.
I encourage you to hurry up.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Anything to add for that?
No, I mean, thank you for that. And let me just say, I think the 12%, in my opinion, is conservative. I think people are always very, very careful when they put a number on an outcome. And I think the reality is it might go a little bit more than that, but 12% is the reported number.
Great. Thank you, David.